everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Christina Lavecchia, and I finished the PhD track in rhetoric and composition in the summer of 2017. For many reasons, we had to prioritize my partner's career, and so I did a geographically constrained search. It took me 2 years, so it did take me some time. Although I will also say that in that first year, I wasn't as open to trying to look at a range of positions. But in my second year, I found a job listing for qualitative research postdoc. And, the challenge of living in Rochester, Minnesota is that there aren't nearly as many opportunities as there are in larger cities. But in this case, it also turned into my benefit because they were having a really difficult time trying to find somebody who came from a social science or humanities background who was familiar with qualitative research. And so that's where I found my opportunity. So again, it took me 2 years doing a geographically restricted search to find this. Um, in my first year, I was only able to apply for 6 positions. In my second, I was able to double that. It was a better year for that region for whatever reason, and I was applying to 13. Um, and although it was at times demoralizing to only apply for, say, 6 positions or 13, at the same time, it gave me an advantage in that I could hyper tailor the applications that I did send out. I could spend many times over the amount of time on those applications as folks doing, more traditional searches. So if you find yourself in a similar position, that's where the hope is, I think, is that you have the ability to tailor. But so again, with my current position, it's in an interdisciplinary research group at Mayo Clinic. It's just a really mix of a group and was the right place for me to find. Not every place at Mayo is like this. It's a pretty unique place in that way. But also what I found was, so it was the luck of finding that group to get me in the door. But then once I got in the door, I was able to create more opportunities. So, if you find yourself in the place where you are, for whatever reason, opening up your search beyond the discipline, which may or may not be your first choice, maybe it is, and that's awesome, and maybe it's not, and you're like me, it was a matter of, the practicality of it. If you open up your search in that way, you can always tell yourself, this is just about getting in the door, and then I can create new opportunities. So try not to see whatever search you're going through as this is the end all, this is my career, is this really the position I want? It doesn't have to be forever, and it's just getting me in the door and creating more opportunities. So for me, some things that worked out, the position that I sought was a postdoc, so that meant it was more mentored training. So that made it possible for me to kind of shift gears and enter a new disciplinary space. Although I was coming in from outside field, I was ahead of the game in other respects. I already had publications, I already know how to write, and ways I know how to talk about my work and research that were immediately valued. And so that really worked for me. I found that working in an interdisciplinary space, if you find the people who are willing to hire someone from out of discipline, that means that they're going to value that perspective you're bringing. And I have never felt more valued. And not that I didn't have fantastic support at UC, but I think that that's just goes to show that the stuff that somebody in discipline might take for granted that we all can kind of do outside of discipline, it's like, wow, you can do that, or that's how you think, or those are the kinds of questions you ask. So, I loved that aspect of being out of discipline. And, it caused some identity crises for me at first, but I think almost any position will, if you just think about the wide range of work, even, ostensibly within the same discipline, the jobs can make us look many different ways. We can take on many different identities in terms of finding these positions and trying to get in the door. So one of the most useful things you can do, and this was advice that I got from the Career Center, fantastic and free resource for doing industry searches. And I was able to take a lot of these same principles and apply them to looking outside discipline. Informational interviews are really crucial because most jobs are gotten through networking. We've all heard that same advice probably since we were, coming out of high school or undergrad. And it's really true. So the thing that really sealed it for me with my position, because they were interviewing someone else who had more healthcare credentials than me, was doing an informational interview by reaching out. I was in a network of families and spouses of trainees at Mayo. I said, does someone in this group just so happen to work for this research group or know somebody who does? Turned out somebody did. I met her for coffee, bought her coffee, and just asked her more about the culture. And that showed initiative. It helped get me some just information about, what the unit was going to be like as well, which helped me to be more successful in my interview. Um, and also just like got me a back channel in. Like she talked to her supervisor before she came to see me, and the supervisor said, "Oh, have her send me her CV right away." Um, I told her I'm actually still waiting on one of my letters of reference. The supervisor said, "That's fine. Send me what you have. We'll put it through. You can always just send it later." So it turned out to be really useful. And even if the person that you talk with for the informational interview can't be helpful, they can usually recommend somebody who can. And so at the very least, it's often just helpful for getting to know the culture, the expectations, what these positions or industries look like. You might not have somebody who's an insider at the very place you're interviewing at like I did, but maybe it's someone who can help you just feel out this other career area. My husband, as well, is an insider in this discourse community as a physician scientist. And so he was like, "Oh my gosh, you cannot send these cover letters that you're writing for your English jobs that are 2 full pages, single spaced. You cannot send that to a scientist. They will never read it." He said it's got to be like industry length. So I had, a 4 paragraph cover letter that took up about 2/3 of one page. There were like 3 or 4, 2 to 4 sentence long paragraphs. Um, I also adapted advice I'd gotten from the Career Center on resumes. So, a current trend in resumes now is instead of putting objective statements at the top, folks put personal summaries at the top, and those are tailored for the position. So, the personal summary might say, experienced and productive writer who is well published and such or other. So, throw a million adjectives in there to just kind of emphasize a key thing that you would bring about you and a key thing you would bring to the position. I adapted that model for my CV as well to help people to navigate it. And I got a little bit more flexible with the categories. So, because this was a qualitative research position, I had, a qualitative research experience section where I piled in, a couple of research assistantships that I'd done over the summer that used a qualitative method of some kind, and also institutes I'd attended that had given me qualitative research training. Whereas on my regular academic CV, institutes are their own section towards the back. I wanted to make sure that stuff got pulled up towards the front. I did things like this, trying to think about how would I help somebody outside discipline who, might think about academic work in a completely different way to navigate this. One of the challenges, but things to think about and work on if you're doing an outside discipline search as well, is denormalizing the work you do and its value. Part of this is knowing keywords to use. So, for instance, project management is a big one in not just industry, but it gets used all the time in the sciences as well. Breaking down things that you know how to do into these parts. So, for instance, teaching teaches you project management. I'm working on this big systematic review, which means that we're taking this big systematic approach to looking at the literature. This big search returned 1,700 hits. So it takes a lot of person power. So, organizing people, making sure everyone remembers what the criteria are because people's memories get fuzzy, setting deadlines, setting up meetings to, coach people on this. That all takes all my teaching expertise. But if I'd only left it at I can teach, in a skills section, that wouldn't capture it, right? The keeping people on deadline thing, quickly reading lots of information and being able to synthesize it, being able to break down complex ideas into simpler ones, things like that. The last thing I'll leave you with, besides our value, is that to do this all successfully, it requires an attitude shift. Instead of being frightened by change, if you're like me and you're a person who's frightened by change and frightened by doing something different, unless you want to be, you do not necessarily have to be leaving the discipline. As well, this is not about, this is a step down, but this is a new opportunity to do new things, to get in the door and do other things. I got into my position and was able to, I was invited to this postdoc support group, and I went and I mentioned to somebody that my background is in writing, and they said, "Oh, we get lots of requests to help support the postdocs with their writing skills. Could you give a talk? We have this, workshop the first Thursday of every month." And I said, "Sure." and I gave a talk. I broke down flow as a metaphor. And they said, wow, this is really valuable. And the director of postdoc affairs came because he was curious, and he said, we should do more about this. Would you be interested in doing a deeper dive on this stuff? And I said, yeah, sure. And it turned into them paying for 10% of my time to teach a workshop series. But long story short, I created that opportunity, and you can too. So, see these as, what new doors can this open? If I had stayed in healthcare, I was being encouraged to get a master's in public health. And a master's in public health seems like a lot more time and money in school and all of that, but also an opportunity to speak back to the discipline and say, here's how people in public health talk about things, and here's what I've learned as a rhetorician in that space. So you too can be a brave explorer. So good luck, and if you ever need anything, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help by email, help mentor.